Hello and welcome to Fertility Talks, the Therapy Fertility podcast. I'm your host, Ranae von Meding. Today I had the pleasure of sitting down with Richie Sadlier, former professional football player, psychotherapist, and football pundit. We spoke about his experience of infertility and IVF.
In my head and in Fiona's head, we both went, no, it's going to work for us.
Of course it's going to work, so
it
doesn't matter.
We're positive people and we live healthy lives and we really want this to work. And we got to the day of the result and it was a no. There was some issue appearing in with the egg quality and so they said, I don't think IVF is for you anymore. I think you may be exploring egg donor. That's a whole other conversation then. Fiona was like, I'm a day or two late. And so she did a test on a Sunday and it said pregnant.
Let's take it back. Maybe if you could introduce yourself and kind of, who you are and what you do.
Richie Sadlier is my name. And I suppose I'll do that thing that most people do. They'll introduce themselves in terms of the jobs that they do.
Yeah.
I have a few different jobs. I work as a football pundit on RTE. So for the next month, I'll be covering the World Cup for RTE. I run my own psychotherapy practice in Dublin, predominantly working with teenagers. And I'm very happily married. I own 2 lovely dogs. And yeah, we got the lovely news recently that we're pregnant. I don't know if I get into this bit at the start. So we're expecting a baby in, all going well, at the end of January. So it'll be our first child.
Well, congratulations. That is amazing news. And yes, one of the reasons why you're here to chat. So when you were growing up, did you always want kids?
Yes. I always assumed that. Do you know, I'll be really, really honest. I had this really odd thing. I remember in my mid-teens going, I wanted to be a single dad. And it's really peculiar. I for the life of me, I couldn't remember. I think it was because my parents were things weren't great, I think, I don't know whether I thought I was a bit cynical about relationships and what if they break up, and if they break up the man mightn't have the child, so wouldn't it be just better and safer if the child, it was just me and the kid, and then nothing would get between that. I think that was the in my middle 16-year-old head was, I don't know.
And did you have a plan to make that happen?
No, of course that idea doesn't really go anywhere.
Sure.
But I think I would have always done, like whenever I got into a serious relationship or kind of well into my 20s or 30s, I think like a lot of people I just would assumed it's in my future, it's the next phase. At some point in when I get to my 40s and 50s, my life will be about looking after my child or taking them to swimming or dancing or GA or school or whatever. So I just assumed it would be there. So but I would have always saw it in my future at some point.
Yeah. And do you remember growing up ever kind of, I know we were all taught how not to get pregnant. Do you ever remember learning about, what might happen if potentially there are challenges when you do try to get pregnant?
God, no. No, so I was in an all-boys school in primary school and in secondary school. And the only education I think I would have received in this area was, like a lot of people, just whatever the biology exam in junior cert. Yeah. And I don't remember ever hearing anything about fertility treatment. I don't remember hearing anything about, or probably even being interested in hearing or knowing about marriage or pregnancy complications or the various different things that can happen along the way. It's not in my memory at all. Yeah. It wasn't part of my education at all.
So you and your wife got married when?
In the summer of 2019.
Okay.
Yes.
And at what point had you started? How long had you been together?
So we got together towards the end of 2017.
Yeah.
And how I ended up kind of learning about fertility treatment was on the back of a conversation I had with Fiona probably around Easter, April or May or something like that in the following year in 2018, and she hadn't been getting periods for probably about a decade.
Wow.
So for a long time, this just wasn't part of her monthly experience. She just wasn't getting periods. And I think any time she'd spoken to GPs about it, it was maybe linked to low BMI or something. But there was never any kind of they didn't delve into it any deeper than that. And then Fiona kind of said, I'd like to check in and see what's going on. And so she said, I'll just do some routine fertility tests. And because we're a couple now, they're going to ask you for a sample.
Sure.
So how would you feel about that? I said, yeah, let's go. Like, so.
Yeah.
So she did the tests at her end, and I gave a sample, and then we had an appointment I remember when it was the morning of one of the semi-finals of the 2018 World Cup. And we went into the clinic, and the lady said in very kind of, she didn't dress it up. She just kind of said, listen, you don't have periods, you don't ovulate, you're not going to be able to get pregnant naturally. If parenthood is something you want, you need to do IVF, and you need to do it soon, because here's the reasons why. And she turned to me and said, your sperm count is normal.
Yeah.
So we were kind of left then. So we hadn't had, like a lot of couples, a long time of trying to get pregnant and having loads of disappointments and loads of concerns and worries and questions as to what was going on. We just went in to get checked, thinking we're soon going to be at the stage maybe wanting to be parents, but not quite yet. And then, so we left there, and remember we had a holiday booked a few days later, and we kind of went away on holiday. And over the course of the holiday, you know, we kind of, it came up in conversation a few times, and we're like, how do you feel about what was said, and how do you feel? And it kind of felt as if we'd have, this is maybe too extreme a term to use, but you know, something like a gun to your head going, if you don't act now, it's never going to happen. Yeah. And we're like, oh, this feels like the wrong reasons to do it. So we both were kind of comfortable saying, let's just wait. And then about 2 or 3 months later, at the very same time, I don't know whether she said it to me or I said it to her, but we both came to a conclusion that we're going to regret not doing this. And there's no guarantees, even if we do it, it's going to work. Yeah. So let's just do it. Yeah. And so we did. At that point, I knew nothing about what was involved, like all the injections or the medication or I just do nothing. So it was all learning on the job.
And when was this? So this was...
So that was the summer of 2018. Okay. And then so in October 2018, we did our first round. Okay. And I remember the conversation with the consultant at the time. And one of the things I remember him saying was, people don't listen to me when I say this, but I'm going to say this to you anyway. Like, the pain of a failed IVF round is enormous. It's enormous. So just please listen to me. And I don't know, it was a lovely way. He said it in a lovely way. And I think it was all designed that just promoting this idea, you need to mind yourselves, because this could be a rocky road. Yeah. In my head and in Fiona's head, we both went, no, it's going to work for us.
Of course it's going to work, so
it
doesn't matter. Yeah.
We're positive people, and we live healthy lives, and we really want this to work, and we'll be fine. And then we did the round, and it was actually kind of fun. So we filmed, like I did all the injections, and we filmed it because we'll show our child how their story, and so we did all this, and then we got to the day of the result, and it was a no. And it was like a train drove over the two of us. Because weirdly, we were completely unprepared. We didn't even allow ourselves to think that this isn't going to work. Yeah. Because we thought, positive mind, a positive outcome. So we were really happy and positive. My immediate reaction was, come on, we get a dog. Honestly, because we're in Carrickmines, we were up getting a coffee within an hour, I'd say, of knowing what the result was. Kind of dazed and kind of just, oh God, how do we deal with this? And I was on my phone on websites, and said, there's a dog in Cavan. If we go now, we'll get the dog. Yeah. And they were like, okay, maybe this is a reaction to the news we've just gotten. Let's hang on. And we said, okay, well, if the next one doesn't work, we'll get the dog. So we did another round the following month or two, which brought us up to a week before Christmas. And that didn't work either. So, which again, we were like, oh my God, that's 2 strikes now. And it was the week before Christmas. And again, we went into this fully expecting success. Because again, we thought if we'd be really positive here, and positivity really works because it keeps you in a good frame of mind and all that. But of course, it leaves you unprepared for the day when things don't go how you want them to. Because we had it all planned, like we were going, we'll be able to tell the family at Christmas, and
And then you plan for what the due date would be, and you know,
we would plan the due date, and then there'd be holiday, and then so it didn't work. A week later, we got engaged, and 3 days after that, we got a dog.
What's the dog called?
Joey, a little cavapoo. And Joey was kind of like a compensatory measure or introduction into the house. We didn't obviously have a little baby, and we didn't know at this point would we ever have a baby. And this little bundle of joy came in, and he was amazing. Because then in subsequent failed rounds, like Fiona would be cradling Joey as if it was a child, and he'd be sitting up on her lap, and so he brought a lot to the house. But it was just we were kind of. Yeah, just the pain of it just completely took me by surprise. Because I did that thing where, you know, someone warns you that something might hurt. And then you think, oh, well, I've been warned. I'm prepared. So now that I know this could really hurt, I can protect myself against it. That's all garbage.
And the really difficult thing with the IVF is that people sometimes think that, like, what you put into it equals the outcome. So if you put all the positivity, all of the effort, all of the work, everything you have into it, that it's going to work. And that's just not the case. Sometimes people who are the most negative and haven't been trying for long and whatever, and it just works first time, and then people who really are like doing it right, it just doesn't work.
I know, and we did think that initially as well. It was like there would be a link between how we live our life and how we think and how we talk about it, and how much we support each other and what our attitude will be to the outcome. And to a large extent, none of those things are linked at all. And we were in it a while, and you just kind of realise we're completely powerless to control the outcome. All we can do here is just the day-to-day things which are suggested, be as sound and as supportive to each other as possible. We both, which was really, really good at the start, we had that thing, and maybe a lot of people are in this scenario, don't know how to handle this bit, and we didn't initially. We're like, who do we tell? Fiona, I remember after the first day when we were told IVF is an option and it was being proposed as the thing we needed to do, she said something, I don't know what the phrase was like, but it was like she didn't want people to know about this, or she was reluctant to tell, or she said some comment like that, and I just at the time figured that wouldn't be the right way for us to go. That kind of closing the door and keeping everyone on the outside of this just wouldn't work. It certainly wouldn't work for me. I couldn't imagine going through something like this with none of my friends knowing, and never saying it to my mates or family. So she kind of said it to someone, and the friend that she told was great and was able to name one or two others in their immediate circle or children that were in her life who go, they're IVF babies, or that couple got pregnant with IVF, and the more people she told, the more it became normal, because so many people in her circle had either personal experience of it or were related to people who had. So it became less a thing that, oh my God, are we the only ones who are going through this, to going, or we're one of loads of people who are going through this. But it's this funny thing that lots of people, for lots of reasons, tend not to say it too widely around their circle. So that's what we did. We made a conscious effort to kind of talk to people and normalise it, which was really helpful.
And you found that helped?
It really did, because like there were times during it all where she would have been really, really low. And there was other times where I'd be completely kind of lost or confused, or do you know that thing where you go, do we need to have a conversation here about, like, do we need to discuss an endpoint? In terms of time or money we're going to spend, or how much emotional energy have we got left? Like, do we need that? And out of those discussions, or like any scenario you go into and going, is this the right thing to be doing? Should we wait, or should we hurry up? And if I hadn't have told friends, if I wasn't in therapy speaking openly to my therapist about it, Fiona would be the only person that I'd get to ask those questions to. And she's dealing with it herself. And of course, like any couple who are in this, you're not necessarily dealing with the same feelings at the same time. I could be in a spell where I'm quite accepting of it and really enthusiastic or happy to take a break, when she could be quite urgent and really keen to get going. So having other people in the room, so to speak, was for me was crucial. I honestly cannot imagine what the last 4 years would have been like if every night we were doing injections, or every day we're doing scans, or every time we come up to do the pregnancy test, that nobody knew. Like, that I just hang out with friends and not tell them what's happened this morning or tonight or what's coming up next week, or just acting around my family as if
everything's fine.
As if everything's fine. Because I know they would have been asking this, so where are you with family and with kids? And like, so do you lie? Like, no way was I going to put myself in a situation where everyone around me would be lied to for 4 years. So we just became one of those couples that everyone around us knew that this is the route we were going down to try to become parents.
Yeah.
And it was great, because when it came up to doing a round, or coming up to time when there was a test, of course all our tests had negative results, so we always had a spell afterwards where we just wanted to close the door. And everyone does it differently. Our reaction was close the door, text family and friends the outcome, and ask them not to ring us. Yeah. Because in other words, give us space.
Yeah.
So because they knew, we were able to ask for space, which meant they were able to give us space. So we didn't have to go around pretending that nothing was going on.
And it's so sad to think of the number of people who do pretend because they feel like they have to. And it sounds like your experience over the last couple of years has been more positive, even though there were so many awful, difficult times of all these negative cycles. But it sounds like just having that support made it somewhat easier. And so many people just don't have that.
Yeah, like I've had loads. I posted about our stuff in the last couple of months on Instagram, and the amount of messages I got from people who were either about to embark on treatment, had been in it, or were feeling a little bit lost, or maybe grappling with the idea that maybe it's now in their past. And lots of them, I would have some kind of exchange with them, and lots of them, like so many of them, said that they didn't tell, lads in particular. I'd say it's a matter of interest, like did your mates know? I hope you got support from your mates. And the most common answer would be things like, well, listen, I told one or two, but nothing, and I've told one in the family, but not the whole family. And that's really understandable reasons. Like, God, I'd never be sitting here telling people how they should act. I'd imagine it's a very lonely road. It's a really difficult road, I know that, but to be travelling it alone where no one else knows what you're doing, so you have to pretend, you not only hide that fact that you're doing it, but you have to pretend you're unimpacted by it. Yeah. Like, what an additional strain.
And I think it's really hard because if you're going through this as a couple, you're obviously going to be each other's supports. And as you said, at different times, one of you might be a bit, in a better place with it, and one of you might be in a worse place. So you support each other, but you also need individual support. Like, if you don't have that individual support, I've seen people, like, IVF can kind of make or break you, I think, as a couple. It can bring you much closer together, getting through something as difficult as IVF, but it can also absolutely break you. And I think especially when you don't have that outside support is when that can happen, because all you have is the other person and no one else knows what's going on, and how can you support each other if you don't also have support,
I remember speaking to a friend of mine. I didn't actually know him that well, but a fella I used to go to the same gym and he said that his 5-year-old son was the result of treatment, but they had a really difficult road to get to the point of having the son. And he said it in really stark terms. He said, your relationship needs to be rock solid in order to get through this. And he kept stressing it. He said, this is going to pull you in so many different directions and put a real strain on you. If it's not solid, you've no chance. Yeah. And I remember thinking, I hope this is really exaggerating this, and I hope it's not as dramatic as he's making out. My God, I can see what he meant. Because, like, just to move our story on, like, our initially, the clinic said that it was because of what was going on with Fiona that we needed treatment. Within 4 months, shortly after the wedding, and we did another round just before, a month before the wedding, Fiona started to get periods. And then within a few months, she was getting periods and ovulating on a monthly basis. And then I think it was the round before the wedding, the sample I gave on the morning of the morning after my sample, they came back and said, oh, it's below, and we need to do ICSI. So then we were in a scenario for the next few rounds where both of us needed kind of support. So we weren't in a scenario where one of us could, in a really insensitive, crude, like thoughtless way, kind of point the finger at the other one.
This is your fault.
This is your, any of that stuff. Like, so we, that was our experience as well. And I remember I remember having a conversation one day and saying to Fiona, like, there's a real danger here that we'll end up focusing on this to the cost of all the other really good stuff we have in our life, because we wanted this obviously so much, and it puts like such an all consuming for Fiona, particularly in when it's during treatment. And I kept, and we would consciously do it, do you know, just constantly try out the things we have or the things we were grateful for. Because I spent all my 20s, kind of a lot of my 20s, mid-20s onwards, like focusing on the loss of my football career. Or then my early 30s, when I got into recovery, I was focusing on the loss of my drinking life and the friends and the social life that came with that. It's like, I'm not spending my 40s focusing in on something that I don't have. Because we've loads of things going on in our life which are really, really good. And we consciously kept reminding ourselves of that. And then just allowing ourselves to just completely break down and feel totally overwhelmed with just loss and heartache when it doesn't work. Because that's needed too. You can't just fake your way through it and go, yeah, but look what we do have. Like there's a mourning period after, for us anyway, after every failed round, because like we just became invested. You know, little dots you see in the screen, like there's a follicle and that might be an egg and that might be an embryo, and then how many embryos have you got and will they last the 5 days? And I just became really invested in these little dots. What could be, the potential of these dots. And they weren't just dots, they were like, wow, that's our kid. And then we kind of weirdly landed on a girl's name early on. So every conversation we've had in the last 4 years, or every little dot I've seen, calling that name. I'd use the name of the girl. Yeah. So it's like, it's weird, and it was just like, and this is maybe, sounds like dramatic, but this is how it felt. It was like she died every time, because she didn't. So then you're kind of mourning that, but then in this really, you know, the reality of it going, well, she may be the result of the next round. So we go again. And then, so you just go again, and then you dust yourself off, you heal, you stop crying, you lift up, and you get positive, and you go, right. And when you're being obviously the man here, like no one was injecting me. I wasn't going to be like turned upside down by all the hormonal kind of imbalances and unsettling stuff that goes on through a treatment. So it was always, I always knew kind of you're kind of, to some degree, you're a passenger. It's going to be driven by how Fiona feels, not just mentally but physically, how her body's going to be, and is she ready for it, or is she up for it, or how does she feel about it? Like often we would have had conversations where we'd sit down and we'd make a decision, and the decision might be, let's just park things for a few months, and then sometime in the next few weeks I get a text from Fiona. She goes, I emailed the clinic there today, and I go, oh, did you? Yeah, go on. How'd you get on? And it would be on the back of maybe seeing a pregnancy post on Instagram, or hearing from a friend that they're pregnant, or listening to a podcast where something just triggered something in her head, and she kicked back into urgency, going, no, we need to act now. So I kind of just realised, don't try and interrupt that process, or even try and understand that it was going to be led by when and how, when she was ready, and I just kind of went with that. Yeah.
And it's hard because, you know, as you say, if you're a man and a woman going through this, like the majority of this is taking place in the woman's body, and it's happening to her body, but it's happening to you as a couple. So it's a I'm sure a very difficult balancing act of trying to manage your own feelings and grief and hope and what you want from the cycles, but actually, you know, it's her body at the end of the day. So how did you manage that? Like, I know you said, you know, at points it was all consuming for her. Like, how did you manage that? Did you feel like you kind of had to censor yourself sometimes in how you were doing?
Well, I remember, and like anyone who's gone through treatment knows this, you'll hear more often than anything else people just tell you, just relax. Right? Those two words. Yeah. Awful.
We need to get t-shirts.
Yeah.
Just relax.
Yeah, they're really well meaning, but like they just, sometimes after a while they can sound quite jarring. But it did kind of know, like, that generally speaking, the more relaxed we both are, it's more favourable to do it that way. So whenever Fiona be worked up or high or low or whatever, which was the inevitable result of the treatment, I just tried to stay as neutral and as calm as possible. So and like, there was, I didn't realise it at the start just how much of an impact it would make on her, like her mood and her just everything. So kind of after a while you just realise, just be kind of clued in and sensitive to all that. But I go to therapy every week. So I have this space of 50 minutes every week, so no matter, there's no filter there. I can say what I want, I can rant away, I can grapple with all the questions that I don't have answers to. The Fiona doesn't necessarily need to hear me say when she's particularly lost and confused herself. So that was a big thing, just me having other outlets. But there is, like, there's some days it just feels like you're a little bit invisible in the process. Like, numerous times, again, this is all really well-meaning stuff, but I'd say to someone, they'd say, how did it go? I says, no, it didn't work. And their next two words are, how's Fiona? Yeah. And it's like they've just seen through you. It's like, it's not even how are you getting on, how did you feel? It's just like immediately the concern for the woman, which is totally understandable. See, that's just how it is. Like, it's right that the person getting the treatment should be getting all the support and the focus, and the partner has a very, very different role. But from my own experience, it's so important that the partner gets support, because yes, you're not getting the physically invasive stuff to deal with, or your hormones aren't assaulted in all sorts of different ways, but by God, it's hard. Like, it really is hard, because we'd be grappling with, not only is the next one going to work, or why did the last one not work, but then the bigger question of, will this ever work? Yeah. And if the answer to that is no, how do we feel about that? And do we need to start now accepting that that's a possibility? Is that the kind of right thing to do, or is that negative and defeatist? And do we need to shut down that conversation? So,
did you ever get to that point? Did you ever get to the point of saying, is this actually ever going to work, and maybe we need to?
No, because any time I'd start thinking like that, and this would often be in therapy, like the big picture questions or the existential ones, like, what do we like to live a whole life and go without ever, like, being a parent? I always kind of came back, the approach that worked for me was just to focus on what's in front of us today, and just to say, well, what's the next right thing to do? Forget like what should be the decision in 8 steps time, depending on how the next 7 things go. So that kind of helped to focus me. So it was always just, will we go again? Yep. If so, when? Yeah. And what do we need to do to get to the point where we're ready to go again? Yeah. And then just accept that no matter what plan we put in place, some external force will come in and completely change Fiona's mind, and we'll have to rewrite the plan again, based on a whole new set of feelings and instincts on her end. So it gets tricky. It's a tricky road.
How many cycles did you do in total?
So overall we did 4 cycles, which overall transferred 8 embryos. So 4 singles and 2 doubles. And I remember the time then, because we were 2 or 3 cycles in, and they said, like, if there's more than one embryo here now, we would be suggesting a double transfer. So how would you feel about multiple births? And it's this weird thing where on like the Monday or Tuesday they tell you that, and then so the transfer is going to be on the Friday. So you spend the 2 or 3 days going, do we want twins or not? As if simply saying yes will bring about twins. So you really get into it, like going, okay, with the pros and cons, and
then you start imagining yourself, and then you start picturing it, and then you're convinced that you're going to have twins.
Exactly. Well, of course it is. Because treatment works, and actually weirdly, the more failures there were, you could either spin that as, well, is this never going to work, or you're going to go, well, we're getting closer to the cards dropping our way.
Yeah, because it's the law of averages. Yeah.
So you're like, okay, right. Okay, buckle up here. We're having twins. So you go in and do the transfer, and they say, how do you feel about the double? Yeah, we're all on. In we go. And they go, okay, right. So you do the maths. Okay, well, the test is this date. The due date is going to be around then. And it's twins. You look around the house going, what changes do we need to make? And blah, blah, blah. And really weirdly, completely unaware of the fact that this might not work again. Because we just completely are consumed by the probability that it'll work. Because we tell us it's kind of, there's no point in doing it if you don't think it'll work. So we think it's work, so it's going to work. And no matter how many times like you'd sprint up against the wall and hit your head against the wall, you think you'd learn. You think the next time you're a bit more braced for not working. But we weren't. We went into everyone going, this is going to work. So then we got to a point where last summer, so the summer of 21, we kind of did what turned out to be our last round, and we got 2 embryos, maybe 3. We did a double transfer, and then the consultant said there was some issue appearing in with the egg quality that we were using. So they said, I don't think IVF is for you anymore. Okay. I think you may be exploring egg donor treatment, which that's a whole other conversation then. Of course. So then we started to have those discussions, and like again, Fiona was kind of grappling with that. Like, how do we feel about like someone else being part of the process, and what would that even entail? So we kind of gave ourselves plenty of time, while also knowing we don't have forever here. And Fiona was like, no, I'm up for this. And I had a load of questions around that as well. And again, but I had my therapist to go to to ask the questions that might not be appropriate to ask of Fiona, because she mightn't have the answers or be able to help me come up with my answers. And we were due to go to Spain last September. We did all the admin, sent the photos and the records and all of that. And I remember on a Friday, we completed the admin. I said, grand. That was a Friday. And then 2 days later, Fiona was like, I'm a day or two late. And so she did a test on a Sunday, and it said pregnant. And like we were gobsmacked. And actually, the line, we have this kind of little route, because we've done it so many times. She'd go to the toilet, do the test, come back without looking at it, and then at some point hand it to me. We'd kind of hug, and I'd look at the test over her shoulder where she couldn't see. Now, obviously, at this point, every test has been negative, so I'd get a moment where I'd see it, and I'd always wait a few seconds just to kind of go, okay, like it's a negative, and then I'd wait, and then I'd say whatever. But in this case, I looked at it, and it was this kind of like crappy little, really unconvincing line. Like no strength, nothing impressive. No, it wasn't bright, but it was there. Yeah. And I just went to her, no, I'm sorry, it's not. But then she looked at it and she goes, there's a line there. And in my head, I was like, oh God, love her, look at her. She's seen something that's clearly not there. But she was telling me, she said, no, any kind of line is a line. And okay, well, what? And so she did a test again quite shortly, and it was a booming strong line. I was like, oh Christ. And then we were like, do we tell people? Do we not? And we kind of went, you know what? We've only had bad news to share to our family. Wouldn't it be lovely to share this good news with them? So we told them. And then we went in to have our scan at the 7-week point, and there was no heartbeat. So whatever about the disappointments that we would have felt with each failed round, or getting invested in the little dots, and this was a whole other level I remember we went in and it was a Tuesday, and I was due to be on RT that night. Liverpool were playing in the Champions League, and I remember ringing the producer saying, I'm just going to flag it with you. Like, Fiona's pregnant. It's an early scan. If this doesn't go well, she might need a bit of... but I framed it all in terms of she might need support, so I might need to stay with her, so I might not be in. I was completely wrong. I was the one who was completely incapable of going on telly that night. So we kind of then had to deal with, like, so what do we do now? Like, who do we tell? How do we tell them? When do we tell them? All that kind of stuff. And that was seen by the clinic at the time as that kind of reinforced what we said about the issue with Fiona's eggs, which kind of strengthens our belief that maybe egg donor would be the route to go.
Yeah.
But we had one more embryo left. And I had spinal fusion surgery this time last year in November. And I can remember we were thinking she may as well do that. It's there anyway. We've done all the hard work to do it. So, like, I'd obviously been used to, I was going to all the scans and all the appointments at the start, and then when COVID hit, I'd just stay outside. I'd kind of just do laps of a field nearby. But for this one, I was bedridden for the early stage of my recovery. So Fiona went in and came out, and even when she got the result, we did the usual thing. She'd hand me the test. Like, I was so on heavy meds for back pain. Like, I was really numb. There was no, it was really weird, and I felt really guilty and really bad, and I felt even more useless, and like that I was kind of abandoning her and leaving her go through this all alone, because there was no support whatsoever at the time. I was the one who needed support because I couldn't really walk. And so that didn't, weirdly that didn't hurt as much because I was on so much pain meds, and then we said, okay, we're back in the world of going to egg donor. And we were in April or May in London this year and had a conversation where we said, okay, we're ready for it, let's go to Spain. And we were due to go to Spain this September, and then the following month, pregnancy test, and she was pregnant. And we got that test, it was the morning of our 3rd wedding anniversary. And we were like, oh, okay. Weirdly, it was like, on the one hand, this is amazing, but on the other hand, going, there was a big part of me anyway was bracing myself for an almighty collapse again. So it was kind of had the brakes on a little bit, going, don't really allow yourself to get excited, because wait till the first scan, wait till you know there's a heartbeat. And so we didn't say it to anyone. Said it to a couple of people actually, but not the families and stuff. And then with each scan, we did 8-week one, heartbeat, normal weight or normal size, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. And now we're up to 30 weeks. It's been the smoothest pregnancy of all. Fiona's been really, and I always feel wary of saying this because, like, it's not comfortable. Pregnancy isn't comfortable, but relatively speaking, she described it as a really comfortable pregnancy. We've got friends who are in this situation, and those women are dealing with loads of issues. So now we're at the part where we're going, like, this does look like it's going to happen. In 10 weeks, all going well, to be a healthy little baby will bounce into our lives. But this was a scenario where at one point we thought it couldn't happen. And then it just evolved from Fiona not having periods to having periods, then my sperm count being low to, but it was manageably low, it wasn't concerningly low, and then we got to a point where they were just describing it as it's unexplained infertility, which did nothing for me. I was like, surely you can give us a reason.
That's the thing that people find hardest, is the unexplained, because at least if you have an explanation for something, I feel like it's easier to deal with it, because you know, okay, well, it's because this. But when it's just like, well, we don't have an answer for you, it's like, so are we doing the right things? Should we even be here? Do you, and I suppose this isn't in my time in it, like, you couldn't realize this isn't an area where you get absolutes, or there's no absolute link between kind of what you put into it and what you get out of it, or and the more people we would talk to about this, they would mention Rosanna Davison, and she became like the example of never give up.
And people would kind of go, well, did you see Rosanna in the Late Later? Have you read her book? Like, that was a miracle, which on the one hand was helpful, but also I was kind of going, oh God, are we in the scenario where we literally were hoping for a miracle? Like that sounds like a bit of a grim place. But then it did happen. It happened. And actually I was going to talk about this. I'll tell you when, like, Living with Lucy contacted us at one point and said, would you do the show? And it worked out. It didn't. They went with other sporty people in that show, so I didn't get on it. But I remember going, I think I'm going to talk to Lucy in front of the camera about this, because there was part of me wanted to talk about this deliberately before I had a baby in my hand or we had a happy ending, because lots of people who talk about this, and it's great, they talk about it, but there's a happy ending attached, which I remember thinking that doesn't do a lot for the people who are still in it. And I just thought it'd be great if there were more voices like that in the conversation. We go, we're in it, it's hard, we don't know where it's gonna go, we don't know the outcome, and we don't have the answers, and we know no one has the answers, but like, this is hard. Anyway, we didn't do the show, we didn't talk about it. So we are now just one of those people who are talking about it we're almost like with our happy ending. But it's not an area that any of my friends would have talked about before now. I was in no conversation with any other men at any point in my life where they discussed this topic. But when I started to tell my friends, then they would start to tell me about miscarriages that their partners had, treatments that their partners had for years. And so many of them would follow it up with, do you mind keeping that to yourself though? Yeah. It's just this thing.
Yeah. I think as you know, once you start talking about it, it kind of opens the floodgates. Like, I remember when we went through IVF first, and people I'd known for years and thought I was really, really close with started telling me all sorts of things about treatments and losses and trying and wishing and hoping, and people who I thought maybe didn't want kids, and I'd never asked them because, you know, I wouldn't ask someone that. But, you know, it's only when you start opening up about yourself that other people feel that they can. So I think it's great. And yeah, as you said, like to do it when you're going through the process, because it's all well and good to see someone at the end with this happy outcome. Of course they want to talk about it because they have this happy outcome. But what about the people who are still going through it? And for the people who it might never happen, you know, that could have been you. You might not have had this miracle. And we need to talk about those people too.
Yeah, there's I suppose lots of reasons. And one of the things that I kept coming back to as well, even when I was thinking about and talking to Fiona, said, are you okay with me talking about it? I was very aware that the reactions would be very different. She'd be flooded with messages, and she would now be in a world where people who even weren't just her friends or her colleagues or her family members, lots of people would know, and she would need to be ready for that. Because I'm kind of comfortable at this stage talking about anything really, publicly or otherwise. But that doesn't mean that it's right that I put Fiona in a scenario where she's put in that situation. So I think it's got to be right for everyone involved. And you can't just do it to prioritize the needs of the audience or who needs to hear this. Like, because like you said, it's private. And everyone kind of grapples with it in their own way, and everyone has their own level of comfort in terms of talking about it to others or people they don't know knowing. So there isn't a kind of one size fits all.
No, absolutely not. And it's definitely not right for everyone
not at all,
to do something like this. But for the people who can, it helps everyone else. Because I know anyone going through treatment just clings on to any sort of, you know, podcasts or videos or interviews or people who are in the public eye who come out and talk about it. Like, that is such hope, and just gives you something to kind of keep going and to relate to, and just not feel so alone. Because when you're not sharing it with your friends and family, you can just feel so isolated and like you're the only person in the world who's ever gone through this.
Fiona used to do that. There isn't a podcast recorded anywhere that she hasn't heard at this stage. If there's anyone who's ever discussed their own journey or their
Yeah.
experiences of fertility, or she listened. And I would often ask her, I said, because a lot of the stories are like heart-wrenching, and there's an upsetting element to a lot of the stories when people start talking about them. And I'd be saying to her, I said, would you not listen to a happier podcast? Is that really helpful? And she'd go, absolutely. The more stories I hear, I find it like it's just helpful. And I think it's exactly like the point you just made. So it just reinforced the idea, actually, this is a space that's really crowded. It's really populated by lots of people. It's just that lots of people who are in it tend not to talk openly about it. I didn't have that approach at all. It kind of didn't really help me at all, listening to how other people got on. I was just concerned with, well, how are we going to get on? So, like, everyone's different.
Absolutely. Is there anything in particular, like now, I'm sure since you started talking about it yourself, kind of publicly, like on your Instagram and the pregnancy announcement, and you've had people contacting you, are people like looking to you for advice, or just saying like what helped you get through it and keep going? And like what do you say to people?
Yeah, loads of the messages are kind of around like, do you mind me asking, what did you do? Or as if there was this one thing that made all the difference. And we were like, Fiona more so than me would be like that as well. She'd listen to podcasts or read articles and look for the one thing. And so she'd go, okay, I need to take this supplement or avoid this food type or take more of this food or change your lifestyle or do something. And maybe there's no link whatsoever. It's just what people talk about. So I'd always really veer away from giving advice to anyone, because people's situation are way more complex than they'll ever be able to describe in a brief Instagram message. So I'd always just kind of say, like, are you accessing support? Are you allowing yourself to lean on the people around you? Because if you don't allow yourself that, you've just increased the difficulty level of your journey like considerably. So I think that's the one thing I think I'm most grateful for in all the stuff we've gone through, that we didn't go into it with an expectation or didn't burden ourselves with the responsibility of having to just manage it alone or as a couple. Because I don't think we would have, I just can't imagine having gone through it without telling anyone. But as well, like, I suppose I'm at the position here of being a partner of someone who's done it, so I don't have the direct experience of doing it, but I wouldn't minimise at all the role that a partner can have in this as well, because like you mentioned earlier about the impact it can have in relationships. I think we're one of the ones that, I know it's really driven a wedge between people, but like, and it's really hard to explain this, but with each round, and they were all unsuccessful rounds, we just kind of got closer, and it kind of, because it was like this, it's this additional connection going, okay, no one but this person next to me knows how this feels and is going through this with me, and they're being really sound and supportive as well as being heartbroken, and you try to be sound and supportive as well as you being heartbroken, and it just became more manageable because of how we were with one another. But we didn't have major lifestyle changes. We like, she wasn't on me saying, you need to, why are you still doing that? And there was nothing. So there was no grounds for friction or finger pointing, or not that we'd ever do that anyway. But it kind of it seemed to kind of deepen things between us with each round. But I'm kind of glad we've maybe for good, but temporarily stepped out of it at the moment, because it's not a world I would have wanted to have been in for that much longer. But I'd say we would have stayed in it, because the outcome that we were aiming for, like, was everything. Yeah. So hopefully now, like, I even say it, I don't use language like we're definitely, or we're there, or we've had our happy ending. Like, we're almost there.
And that's really hard, I think, and that is someone who has had any unsuccessful fertility treatment or any loss. You lose that optimism and that naivety of it's all going to just be okay. There is that reservation of, well, until I actually have my baby in my arms. Yes, every step is a step, but it's until you actually have your baby, and even then you have to mind them for the rest of your life. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, until you actually have your baby, you kind of are holding your breath a bit.
Yeah.
I'm very excited for you too. Well, you 4 with the dogs.
2 dogs.
5? Will you be 5?
Yeah, we
Family of
work
5.
out. So we have a little Cavapoo and a really big slobbery St. Bernard.
When did you get the St. Bernard?
She's 6.5.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to see how hygiene wise how a newborn baby and a slobbery St. Bernard can coexist in the one house.
What are you most excited for in terms of being a dad?
The moment that you get handed the child the first time, and I don't know what, they're not going to be much bigger than my 2 hands, and I think just in that moment I go, okay, right, I can provide everything this child needs. They just need to be held, and things will get unbelievably trickier after that. And my role will be way more complicated. The child will need way more from me than simply holding out my hands. But I think it's that moment that we don't know if it's going to be a boy or a girl.
Are you going to wait to find out?
We're going to wait.
Yeah.
So I think that moment where hopefully the delivery will okay, there'll be a healthy baby at the end of it. We're going to find out if it's a boy or a girl. I don't think I have any concept of what that moment will be like, but I just imagine it will be indescribably amazing.
It will be. It will be. Well, congratulations again. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I have no doubt it will absolutely help people who may be in a similar situation than what you and your wife have been in for the last couple of years. So thank you.
Should be nice if it did. Thanks a million for the chat.
Yeah.